A few thoughts today on this Sunday around the sermon title, An Elusive Concept. An Elusive Concept. Two passages that we listened to this morning, one from the Old and one from the New Testament. And they are both passages that has played a role in my life and that has contributed to my formation and enabled me to live a meaningful life, often through difficult circumstances. I became aware of that passage in Isaiah for the first time when I was searching for something to read for a leadership group in my graduation here, in the beginning of that, and that was the year, let me think quickly, 1975. We were doing putting a variety concert, a lot of performing items together for the whole school, and it was a taxing endeavor. And towards the end of the week, I could see everybody was faltering, and it was a time different from now, in a different country as well, obviously, where one could at that stage still read something from the Bible or use a Bible verse. Not that I say we should integrate church and state now. And it struck me, this passage that I found, encouraged me and enabled me to continue to provide leadership and to encourage the rest of the team as well, working on this concert we were putting together. The other passage from the New Testament is also a passage that is at the core for me of the teachings of Jesus, and that I think should be at the core of the life of the church and of Christianity. I included the passage from Isaiah in that project we had on the day that the Black Lives Matter march took place in Topsfield, supporting that. And after the march, we did the project that we titled Readings from the Book. And a number of members from their church and friends of the church read passages from the book, and I, among other passages, nominated that passage from Isaiah. The two passages struck me again as I was trying to prepare something for the Sunday. And the elusive concept I am referring to in the title is that of hope. And after selecting these two passages, probably subconsciously, it dawned on me that these passages do not directly speak about hope, but are more focused on providing sustenance or sustaining you in a time of difficulty. And afterwards, after the selection was made, I said to myself, well, I think those are appropriate passages when we speak about hope. Because in the pandemic and everything else that we have to deal with at this stage, I think many of us are getting worn down. Awareness is setting in for a number of reasons. And it was brought to me, home to me, during one of the virtual small group meetings recently, when one of the participants asked me a very difficult question, saying, "Martin, can you tell me why we should have hope for the future?" And like with all Zoom meetings or virtual gatherings, it's very difficult to exactly gauge what is happening in communication because we do not have the privilege of body language interpretation that could provide the context for verbal or written communication. So I asked the person asking me this question, why are you saying that it is, or implying or hinting that it is a time of despair? And the person who asked me the question built quite a solid case, I must say, for a search for hope and things mitigating against it. And he mentioned climate change and how that is ravaging our environment. And he mentioned the pandemic and everything that goes with that in several ways, the heavy toll extracted from the whole world, but especially from us here in the US. And then he also mentioned the partisan divide, the extreme division, divisiveness in our nation, and also the ugly tone that much of it has been acquiring. I think it was difficult for me to respond because when dealing with hope, as I've been trying for a number of decades, trying to define it and always arriving at an unsatisfactory definition for myself and definitely for other people as well, I think it is, under current circumstances, and especially in the pandemic, appropriate for us to, and I've said this before, to walk humbly and to speak with appropriate humility, but also to remember that words and actions and decisions have consequences. I think it is even more so when we deal with the precious commodity that we can call hope. Because hope is what sustains individuals, communities, nations, would sustain humanity. When hope disappears, or when hope is confused with just mere positive thinking, and when hope is treated with a superficial shrug of the shoulders and the standard answer or a saying that we encountered in New Zealand among the Kiwis, whenever there's something difficult that happens or difficult circumstances or a problem arises, many of them would just shrug their shoulders and say, "She'll be all right, she'll be all right." Similar, I think, in similar vein to what we encountered here in New England, and I tried to research the phrase, "it is what it is," trying to find out if this is peculiar to New England or where did this originate and what is the circumstances in which it originated and what is the exact meaning of it. But for me, it conveys a almost fatalistic acceptance of a current state of affairs and a resignation to it and say, well, this is what it is. I can't do anything about it. So with it, for me, goes an abdication of personal responsibility and giving up even the pretense or an attempt to do anything about the current circumstances. One has to speak with humility. Also, in a time like this, and especially about hope, because false hope is very dangerous. It cannot be sustained, it lacks integrity, and it will lose credibility. One author, and I can't even remember where I read it, I just remember that he said hope is often unfounded, but it is not an irrational response to human experience. Now, after trying to skirt around the edges of this elusive concept, let me try to put out a few markers. Not to get my arms around it or asking you to get your arms around it from the meager comments and thoughts that I can offer, but just trying to, as I say, put out a few markers, something that we can hang our hat on and perhaps work with as we look at hope in the time that we live in. I think there is an experiential component to hope. Lived experience is part of what plays a role in what we call hope. There is a historical component to it as well. I think inaction and passivity create circumstances where hope withers and where despair can start to germinate or even flourish. I think deliberate and purposeful action, or just some action, creates hope, and I think some action, especially reformed and knowledgeable action, creates a feeling at least, or the emotional environment for feeling that I have some control over my future. I can do something and I can influence my own future and the future of those that I care about and those that I find with me on life's journey. I also think, and this is the third aspect among many that could be elevated, but that I want to, mention this morning, and that is that I think hope gets amplified and the soil for the germination of seeds of hope is created in a web of relationship, in community. When we are with like-minded people, when we are sharing life's journey with fellow travelers, when we are together like we are together now, even if it is a virtual togetherness, we create the circumstances that can foster and amplify hope. Hope tends to be a scarce commodity when we are trying to create hope or to experience hope in isolation. Bringing that to our own circumstances as a community, and I'm talking about the church community now, I think we are very fortunate that we have been spared the worst of the ravages of COVID. I am not aware of anybody that were directly influenced in the sense that we lost someone close to us through COVID, even though we've had a number of deaths during this period. Seems that the COVID angel of death so far passed us by. I'm also aware of a few people who are experiencing job insecurity and some who have lost their jobs and who are dealing with that. I think all of us experience to some extent at least a low-level anxiety, like there is something out there that is threatening, that creates difficulty for us, or an awareness that all is not well. If we look at especially our young family, and particularly with households where we have both parents working, or even for single parents with children of whatever age, it has been an extremely taxing time. And it continues to be as we look towards the future with a reopening or not opening of schools, and different models proposed for that. Over a very short period of time, our young families had to learn to live within one space that, where it was a place called home, now had to be called the office and preschool and school as well. We have, as a nation and also as a church situated within this nation and our community, lived through a number of very difficult years as well, with a climate of animosity, with a climate of distrust and suspicion. When we look at what we did as a church, I think we have been consistent in our programming and in our stance to not take the easy route, not do what is dictated by culture, but try to, in this climate of the past few years, try to be a voice of reason, try to be a place of reconciliation, try to be that safe place where civil conversation can still be conducted and where there is respect for a variety of perspectives. And I think we have been able to, and I say so with great humility and with deep gratitude, been able, at least to an extent, to create that space without sacrificing our core identity, while still insisting that we are guided and that we gather and that we find the common ground without giving up justice and what God's love demands of us. Those are a few very small and brief examples that we can look at and look back at and say, you know, we did this. And for young families, they can look back and say, we survived that, perhaps barely and not unscathed, and perhaps with gray hair prematurely. But against the odds, we have been able to stay together as a community, being true to ourselves, and to stay together as families, making up this community, while traveling roads that we haven't imagined that we will travel, while doing things that we could have never imagined that we would have to do, and doing things without a manual for it existing, making it up as we go along, like the Zoom services, where through sheer tenacity and an unwillingness to give up, us amateurs have managed to bring some form of a service, not the full service every Sunday, and some of us not having a service at all on any given Sunday, but managed through our staff's commitment and also through the commitment of the volunteers to gather like this. I was thinking this morning that as people logged on, there are a few new phrases that emerged in this process, like the technical difficulties look that someone mentioned. He or she has the look of technical difficulties. And I think we have been invited into bedrooms and homes that were previously just our private domain. But now people see the image of this as the books that this person read. Like the TV presenters, we also see. Don't look at their faces. I try to see if there are any books, and if there are, what kind of books, what are the titles that they have. So this is the experience, that experiential component that I talked about, that we can fall back on. This is our capital that we can work with. This is the experience that we share in this web of relationships that constitute our community, that we can look up at and say, yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we stumbled often. Yes, it was extremely difficult in many instances, but we made it. And we have managed to stay together and to do what is right. We swam against the currents, but we have learned what we have in one another and in each other. We have seen these are the people under pressure and under difficult circumstances. This is people that you can trust, that you can journey with into the future. We did this while staying true to our core identity as followers of Jesus. So we can look towards the future with confidence, not knowing exactly what will happen, but being able to say to one another, we have traveled thus far. And from what we have experienced with this group of people, we can venture and journey into the future, even under strange and difficult circumstances. We have built and sustained the beloved community, and we will be able to do that into the future as well. Let us remember the importance for the creation of hope, of community. Let us continue to nurture this community, this beloved community, so that it can stay true to the identity of beloved community, God's community, reflecting God's love towards one another and in the world. And let us continue to remember, if we assign any validity and meaning to the message of Easter, if we assign any meaning to that most important narrative in Christianity, the narrative of Easter, of new beginnings, of new life, of a transforming experience that change lives, that change communities, and that is sustaining individuals and communities, not only church communities, but even civilizations. That narrative of, yes, there is always renewal. And what is beaten down, when it is born of love and of compassion, it leads to justice. And in the end, love and hope and peace and justice will prevail. So let us, as a small community, as ordinary individuals, as ordinary families, trying to make sense of all the difficulties and all that can suppress our hope, that can lead to despair. Let us journey together into the future as God's people. Let us look after one another, so that the seeds of hope may flourish and may grow into a forest where life can be found. May God help us. May God lead us in that way. Amen.